So while preparing for this lecture, I spoke to a friend of mine who is a technological designer in Johannesburg, and asked him what he thought about the idea of innovation. He studied at MIT, is very aware of what is going on in the world, and I was somewhat surprised when he told me straight ahead that for him, innovation, and I quote him, is nothing but a slogan. And I asked him why. So he went on to explain to me that, in fact, our times, this age we live in, our times are dominated by something he called the mania for innovation. And then he added, and I quote again, the mania for innovation is a disease which tends to disproportionately affect dystopian societies. I wasn't really expecting this from him. And I might not go as far as he did. But listening to him forced me somewhat to pause and ask, innovation, yes, but of what kind? We have to ask what kind of innovation, to what ends, who benefits. We might want to pause and reflect anew about what we really care about. And this requires that we go back to the question not only of means, but more importantly, of ends. So what I'm suggesting as a first remark is a critique of the concept of innovation, which puts at its center the question of ends, the question of finality, as opposed to the dominant view that is going on right now, in which innovation is preoccupied almost exclusively with the question of means. Let me add quickly that to criticize the rhetoric of innovation is not identical to decrying innovation. To critique it doesn't mean that we are against innovation. Now, properly understood, the idea of innovation has always been, at least in the Western world, part of theories of time and theories of history. You see, the West, as opposed to other parts of the human world, has always been preoccupied with this question of time and history. The others have been too, but in many different ways. So, for instance, when we go back to the most recent past, we realize that in the Western world, theories of history, let's say history used to be understood as a supernatural process. Supernatural process in the sense that history was basically the result of the work of God. God ruled time, and history was akin to providence. And this was the dominant conception in the West from the Middle Ages until the 18th century. The idea that we are who we are because of divine providence. Now, most of these changed in the 18th century when theories of history became secular. And from the 18th century onwards, it was believed that all events in historical time could be explained by prior events in historical time. And this was when the idea of God's providence gave way to the idea of progress. The concept of God's providence was replaced by the concept of progress. In short, progress meant that human history was the history of human betterment. That, in fact, our history was one of constant amelioration, betterment of our conditions of life. Of course, this idea of progress had its critics, but it dominated the Western world between the Enlightenment and at least the First World War. After the First World War, not many people believed any longer in the idea of progress because they had seen what humans were capable of. Then came the 19th century, when the idea of progress was gradually abandoned and gave way to that of evolution, with all its consequences, of course, in terms of the classification of human beings in a ladder, the hierarchies that were drawn from such classifications, so-called scientific racism emerging precisely in the bosom of evolutionism, and so forth and so on. Then came the 20th century, when the idea of evolution was discarded to give way then to that of growth and innovation. So to some extent, the concept of innovation is a very recent concept. By the end of the 20th century, innovation itself was starting to be qualified. Many began to speak about disruptive innovation, which itself was a slight re-rendering of Schumpeter's concept of destructive creation. In any case, disruptive innovation as a way of talking about the present and the future. Now, as we enter the 21st century, disruptive innovation is more than ever presented as the model for the future. It is increasingly presented as the explanation for how change happens. You want change, it will take this form of disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation, if you want, is the new faith. It explains and it justifies. Then we shouldn't forget that this is a concept that originates, in fact, in the arena of business. It comes from the business world. I have nothing against business, I have to say immediately, but you will agree with me that business is not the sum total of everything.